So, I really hate long, awkward, rambly intros, and I know you do too, but we have to do one because there's a lot to cover. First, trigger warnings. There's some transphobia and ableism in this video, but luckily it's visual only. There's also lots of lies. We will be discussing a lot of lies in this video, which could be triggering to anyone who suffered emotional abuse. Aside from that, if you decide to watch Pigpuncher's original video, there are some issues with displays of anger and aggression, and also some volume issues that can be very unpleasant or even painful if you have sensory issues. Second, I will not be playing clips from Pigpuncher's video. This is partly because of the aforementioned volume issues, but also partly because of issues with the livestream format. Pigpuncher insists on playing Ethel's video at increased speed, which makes them virtually unintelligible. He also talks over the video, which just adds to the confusion, and he constantly breaks up his actual response with random tangents. So instead of playing clips, I'll be providing timestamps for Pigpuncher's video and the occasional quote. I'm also presenting my analysis in a linear format, even though it's a bit boring because it's easier to write and also much easier to fact check. Finally, cards on the table, I have some biases going into this. Not only am I a subscriber and a low-level patron of Essence of Thought, but Ethel has shared my work before and we have somewhat of a personal relationship. I also take issue with ContraPoint's behaviour, and I don't think her apologies are adequate or even sincere. Speaking of conflicts of interest, Pigpuncher also has a conflict of interest. As he revealed in his video, ContraPoints started following him on Instagram, and he's very happy about this, to put it mildly. He even jokingly cites this as the reason for his response to Ethel. Unlike myself, however, he doesn't seem to have any interest in mitigating his biases, or even any awareness that they exist. However, Pigpuncher's biases don't negate my own, so if you want to take my words with a grain of salt, do be my guest. I'd just ask that you consider doing the same with Pigpuncher. And with that said, we can get to the actual response. At 3 minutes 30, Pigpuncher responds to Ethel's claim that ContraPoints behaves in a way that's harmful to trans people by asserting that she only harms trans people by hurting our feelings. On its own, this is incredibly insulting and condescending, and also unsubstantiated. But then he keeps going. At 4 minutes 13, Pigpuncher outright contradicts himself, stating that Contra's behaviour can have unintentional, but nonetheless real, harmful effects for trans people. Pigpuncher acts as if Ethel accused Contra of being malicious, but they did no such thing. They said, quote, "Do I believe that Natalie Wynn displays a lot of problematic behaviour that can harm both non-binary and binary trans people? Yes," unquote. There's no mention of intent. For reference, this quote ends at 29 seconds into Ethel's original video. Pigpuncher is less than half a minute in, and he's already attributed a claim to Ethel that they never made. At 4 minutes 44, Pigpuncher further asserts that ContraPoints has atoned for her behaviour through apology and clarification. He doesn't attempt to justify this or even really explain what he means. He also fails to address or even consider the possibility that her apology and or clarification was inadequate or disingenuous in ways that he's not attuned to due to being cis. Now, if that was all he said, I wouldn't bother bringing it up. I'd just dismiss it as a simplistic and unnuanced view. However, Pigpuncher goes on to assert that anyone who criticizes Contra post-apology or post-clarification is likely acting in bad faith. Pigpuncher has decided, without a full understanding of the situation, that anyone who takes issue with ContraPoints is in the wrong and malicious. And he makes a point of trying to impress this bias on his audience. At 6 minutes 21, we have a bit of a problem. Because Pigpuncher insisted on playing the video at increased speed, he mishears Ethel. While Ethel said, quote, My second video will tackle the point that had originally caused me to stop watching her video, unquote. Pigpuncher hears this as Ethel admitting they didn't watch the whole video, and therefore concludes they are likely acting in bad faith. Granted, Ethel does mumble this line, and it's difficult to hear even at normal speed, to the point that I had to use the auto-generated subtitles, but the fact that there were tools available and Pigpuncher didn't attempt to use them is telling. Pigpuncher held this very damning fact over Ethel for the rest of his response, yet didn't think it was a problem that he didn't know exactly what was said. Additionally, the word originally is still clear in Pigpuncher's video, clearer even than Ethel saying they stopped watching the video. So even without understanding the quote in its entirety, he shouldn't have jumped to thinking Ethel hadn't watched the whole video in the first place. At 6 minutes 55, Pigpuncher declares Ethel's entire video bad faith because they said, quote, during which she goes so far as to compare her non-binary critics to fascists in their methods, as well as insinuating they could be literal fascists using their anonymity as a shield, unquote. Pigpuncher's reaction borders on throwing a tantrum, so strong is his disagreement. He then goes on to agree with everything Ethel said and argue their own point back at them. Yes, really. Pigpuncher complains that Contra actually said non-binary critics and fascists behave the same way, i.e. that Contra compared non-binary critics to fascists in their methods, and that it's so difficult to tell the difference between non-binary critics and fascists that Contra can't tell whether they're actually non-binary people or whether they're, quote, alt-right plants that are just trying to make the left look bad, unquote. I.e., she insinuated they could be literal fascists using their anonymity as a shield. Pigpuncher agrees with Ethel 100%. It seems his only issue is that Ethel phrases Contra's behavior in a way that makes it look just as bad as it is. Then, as if that's not enough, at 9 minutes 06, Pigpuncher says, quote, this is just how people on the internet attack people they don't like, unquote, which seems to imply that comparing Contra's critics to fascists is wholly unnecessary and outright demonizing of non-binary people. In fact, I was planning on making this exact argument if I ever did a long-form response to Contra's video. Some people on the internet are vicious with public figures they don't like. This isn't new, it isn't fascist, and it's not unique to non-binary people. So, to be clear, we're 9 minutes into Pigpuncher's video and only a minute and a half into Ethel's, and Pigpuncher has declared Ethel's video to be wholly in bad faith because 1. Pigpuncher misheard Ethel, and 2. Because Ethel said something Pigpuncher agrees with. Yes, this really happened. No, I am not exaggerating. At 10 minutes 20, Pigpuncher takes issue with Ethel saying that their third video will, quote, cover the portrayal of her critics and their actions while discussing how Natalie displays an amazing lack of self-awareness, unquote, and, quote, she effectively points her finger at such people, bringing the wrath of her 800,000 subscribers down on their heads, unquote. He's so furious at it that he bangs his fist on the desk and calls Ethel a weaselly little liar. And that's his right, but I do think it's a bit of an overreaction given that he's freaking out over a summary of content that will be covered in a subsequent video. The argument doesn't even exist, but Pigpuncher's still somehow angry about it. And it's at this point that I need to publish a minor retraction. In my previous video, I said that the concept of abstraction, as presented by ContraPoint in her video, had no use. I was wrong. It was clearly intended for Pigpuncher, as he abstracts Ethel's claim that Contra has no self-awareness into the claim that Contra is a hypocrite. It seems minor, but hypocrisy has a much harsher connotation than a lack of self-awareness, and also leaves room for intent. So Pigpuncher is implying that Ethel could be calling Contra dishonest when they did no such thing, which is extremely shady when you consider that Pigpuncher is accusing Ethel of arguing in bad faith. As for Pigpuncher's actual argument, he claims that Ethel is talking about Contra sharing tweets without the profile pictures censored, which seems to be true given the entire quote, though it also seems they're going to talk about the broader point of Contra demonizing her non-binary critics as a whole. Pigpuncher's point is at least somewhat substantive in that he genuinely disagrees with Ethel this time. This isn't a case of him arguing their own points back at them. However, Pigpuncher is still wrong. The fact is, profile pictures can be used to reverse image search some accounts. Yes, it only affects some accounts, but the fact that it is possible means Contra was still negligent. Not only that, but there's also the very real chance that people in her audience could stumble upon the accounts in question and recognize the profile pictures. And some people have claimed that this has happened to them. At best, Pigpuncher could assert that these people are lying, and that the chances of people being harassed due to their profile pictures being displayed in Contra's video are so small as to not be worth considering. But even if we were to accept such a grossly unsubstantiated argument, that would only add credence to the idea that Ethel is wrong or overly cautious or has too high a bar as far as responsibility goes. It wouldn't prove that they're deliberately dishonest, which is what Pigpuncher was claiming. What Pigpuncher is doing here is he's equating a simple disagreement with dishonesty, which is very silly, and also unfair, and bad faith, and dishonest. At 14 minutes 21, Pigpuncher says, quote, "Don't worry, I actually watched the whole video, I watched it in good faith, not going into the video disliking ContraPoints," unquote. Once again, Pigpuncher wrongly states that Ethel didn't watch the video, but what's worse is, he implies that going into a video with dislike of something is the same as going in bad faith. In addition to just being, well, wrong, it's also telling that Pigpuncher never directs this criticism inwards. He went into the video disliking Ethel, and at this point, it's clear he went into the video looking for reasons to dismiss it, yet he doesn't consider that he's going into the video in bad faith. It's one standard for Contra's critics, and another standard for him, it seems. Or maybe he just thinks he's too rational for his emotions to cloud his judgment. I'm honestly not sure. I don't know how someone can get everything this wrong by accident or on purpose. At 14 minutes 35, the virus mutates. Before, Pigpuncher said that Ethel only watched an indeterminate portion of Contra's video, but now we have a solid number, 21 minutes. Why did Pigpuncher think that? Well, because Ethel says that the current video would cover the first 21 minutes of Contra's video. But if you've seen Ethel's video, you'd know they said they would cover up until the point they originally stopped watching in their second video. The 21 minutes is an unrelated number, but Pigpuncher just assumes this is the amount of time they watched for despite clear evidence to the contrary. Because reasons, I guess. Because of that, for a portion of the video, the narrative is that Ethel only watched the first 21 minutes of Contra's video, even though the actual number is at least double that for their first viewing. This later becomes 21%, then, later, 20%. Incidentally, 21% does happen to be exactly 21 minutes, but I don't think Pigpuncher's mental maths is quite good enough for this to be intentional. At 15 minutes 19, Pigpuncher shows Ethel saying that ContraPoint isn't talking about cancelling, but rather call-out culture. Pigpuncher pauses the video before Ethel can actually make their argument to retort that, no, Contra was right. Does he explain what makes Contra right? No. He then complains that cancel, as it's being used in this context, doesn't exist in the dictionary. Then, at 1611, Pigpuncher mishears Ethel saying they based their definition of cancelling on the way it was originally used by the people who originated the term, as them saying they used the dictionary definition. He actually goes to the extent of googling the dictionary definition of the word, so stubborn is he in this obvious misrepresentation. He also argues that Ethel's definition of the word is wrong and that Contra's is right because, well, he really doesn't give a reason. He actually says Ethel's definition is valid. Apparently, Contra's definition is just more valid because, well, I don't know, I guess Pigpuncher likes it more. Someone in Pigpuncher's chat also says that the actual definition of the word shouldn't matter because Contra defines it in her video, and Pigpuncher agrees with that. All of this betrays not only dishonesty, but a very shallow understanding of how language and the dictionary work. And now I need to go on an esoteric rant, so do please bear with me. The dictionary is not a rulebook for the English language. Yes, it's true that we often resolve disputes about the meanings of words by appealing to the dictionary, but this isn't a behavior that's enforced or intended by the writers of the dictionary. In reality, all the dictionary does is describe the way words are commonly used. Given that, not only is it possible that the established definition can be challenged, but there's no reason you can't ascertain the definition of a word without a dictionary definition, which is what Ethel did. And yes, you could argue that Ethel's definition is subpar or outdated, or that there could be alternate definitions that are just as or even more valid. Dictionary definition or no, there will be disputes over how words are used and how they should be used. But the way to resolve that isn't to say, this definition is more valid because I like it more. We choose the best definition by aiming for consistency, clarity, unequivocality, and other traits that assist in communication. Ethel's criticism is that the distinction between cancel culture and call-out culture is useful, and that their conflation is misleading. And that isn't a criticism that can just be dismissed with Contra's using her own definition, or I like Contra's definition more. I mean, you can, but that's hardly a refutation. At 1843, Pigpuncher shows Ethel arguing that, unlike call-out culture, cancel culture isn't as open to the possibility that the cancelling is happening for pure spectacle, as cancelling can only be done by a former fan, usually on the grounds that the creator violated the fan's ethics. Pigpuncher then abstracts this as saying they think cancelling can only be done for a good or valid reason. Saying that cancelling isn't done for spectacle because it's done by a former supporter for personal reasons equals saying that cancelling can never be done for a poor reason? Pigpuncher then lays out the hypothetical of PewDiePie being cancelled by his largely Nazi audience for denouncing Nazis as a way to illustrate his point. It really says a lot that Pigpuncher has to reach all the way to Nazis to make a refutation. Also, someone should really tell leftist boy Pigpuncher that Nazis do not have ethics to cancel anyone over. At 21:36, Pigpuncher declares he won't be watching the whole video on the grounds that, quote, "We already know this video is in bad faith, there's no point in me just responding to lies," unquote. He then argues that it's okay for him not to watch the whole video because he thinks it's in bad faith. The problem is twofold. First, of course, it's another double standard. He's allowed to dismiss a video without watching it if he thinks it's bad faith, but Ethel isn't allowed to do the same to Contra. It's one standard for Pigpuncher, and another for Contra's critics. But arguably more importantly, he claims that there's no sense in responding to lies when not only do the vast majority of video responses consist entirely of exposing lies, this one, but Pigpuncher in specific tends to cover alt-right and Nazi creators who are known for their lies, such as Paul Joseph Watson and Stephen Molyneux, image on screen. While I'm not here to tell Pigpuncher what he should and should not cover, and I'm not going to tell him that he's dishonest for deciding that something isn't worth his time, I do find it suspicious that he'd refuse to respond to the actual meat of the video he's denouncing on the grounds that it is in fact incorrect, especially when it seems he's maliciously misrepresented it. It's almost as if he's less concerned with wasting his time and more concerned with his audience hearing Ethel's arguments and ideas. 754. At 23:57, Pigpuncher shows Ethel describing their thoughts and feelings around Contra's failure to take non-binary people's criticisms into account regarding Buck Angel's inclusion in opulence, given his transphobia against non-binary people, image on screen. Rather than argue Buck Angel's innocence, Pigpuncher leaves it at saying that Contra and Buck are friends behind the scenes, which is apparently supposed to be a defense rather than a condemnation. It's so strange to see him put his finger right on the point and still miss it. In fact, at 26:20, Pigpuncher actually agrees that it's valid to criticize Contra for being friends with Buck Angel on the grounds that Buck Angel is probably transphobic. Somehow, I don't think Pigpuncher would agree if the same words came out of Ethel's mouth. Finally, at 28:47, Pigpuncher explains to us the real reason non-binary people criticize ContraPoints. According to him, it's because ContraPoints is seen as their representative, and they don't like her de facto speaking for them, so they're looking for reasons to hate her, even though she's done absolutely nothing wrong. It's totally fine, you guys. Pigpuncher has fabricated an extremely dismissive, infantilizing, dehumanizing, demonizing motivation for a large portion of the non-binary community without evidence, and contrary to the evidence. The fact is, many non-binary people were previously fans of ContraPoints, and they only started to dislike her when she behaved in a way that made them feel invalidated and attacked for their non-binary identities. I can vouch for that, because one of my close friends is non-binary and I saw their attitude towards Contra change in real time. Actually, Pigpuncher doesn't even have to take my word for it. Ethel implies this in their definition of cancel culture, where they say that only a former supporter can partake in cancel culture. By definition, the non-binary people who cancelled Contra, Ethel included, had to start out liking her. And if that's not enough, if Pigpuncher had watched a couple more minutes of Ethel's video, up to 7:54, he'd see Ethel go so far as to gush, absolutely gush, about how much they liked ContraPoints, with objective evidence, just in case you wanted to assume they were lying. This idea Pigpuncher presents, that non-binary people started out disliking Contra out of envy, is obvious bullshit. It couldn't be based on actual evidence he's collected from listening to or observing non-binary people. Because if he did, they'd prove him wrong in an instant. He's just making shit up. He is telling bold-faced lies about non-binary people in order to dismiss their perspective just because he doesn't like what they have to say, and this from someone who's supposed to be a trans ally? I don't think so. And this is the point I was originally going to end on, but there's more shit to unpack, because while this video was in production, people wasted no time in holding Pigpuncher accountable for his terrible behaviour. It did not go well. When Pigpuncher's mistakes were pointed out to him, rather than simply apologising and making a retraction, he decided to blame his lack of air conditioning. Yes, that's really what happened, image on screen. When people quite rightly called bullshit, he doubled down, claiming that Ethel admitted to only watching Contra's video up to the section on James Charles, despite having been corrected by that point, image on screen. Now, that would be bad enough on its own, but it gets worse. He claims that Ethel is only attacking Contra out of some desire to become more popular than her so that they can have the top spot on YouTube as a trans creator and advocate. His evidence for this? Well, Pigpuncher says he discovered Ethel had dismissed some trans people as tokens. Not all trans people, certainly not this trans person, just some trans people, such as Sarah Michelle, someone who opposes hate speech law, bullies trans people for not being trans enough, and likes to hang out with known transphobe and plain terrible person Noelle Plum, images on screen. She also sided with and defended Stephen Woodford during the Great Split of the secular community and the coup of the atheist community of Austin. In fact, all of Pigpuncher's sources on Essence of Thought did. Also, if you'll recall, this isn't the first time Pigpuncher made this claim. He also said this in his video, just without this oh-so-juicy evidence. So even if he were right about all this, he'd still be wrong somehow. And this isn't even all the Twitter drama. These are just the highlights I decided to cram into my script at the last minute. Pigpuncher, you lied about Ethel's statements and intentions, and you characterized large swaths of the non-binary community as malicious, childish, and close-minded, all while projecting your own faults onto innocent people and refusing to make amends. You are a despicable, dishonest, violent person, and if you have even a single honest bone in your body, then you will apologize.